At the conclusion of talks with the Russian delegation in Saudi Arabia, Mike Waltz, the U.S. National Security Advisor, noted that
only President Trump can do that.
Only President Trump could have shifted the global conversation on how to end the Ukraine war. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, determined not to be outdone, quickly noted that the first important point he wanted to make was that the only leader in the world who could make this happen is President Trump.
He's the only one in the world that can do that right now.
Welcome to America's new North Korea-style diplomacy, where our diplomats are more worried about their boss than the adversary. It's true that Donald Trump has found a lightning-fast way to end the war in Ukraine. Surrender. At least when France fell in 1940, it did so in the wake of a German blitzkrieg that swept through the country. Ukraine has actually held back Russian forces for 3 years now, and despite fighting a much more powerful adversary, even taken some Russian land. And yet, the Trump administration has preemptively conceded most key Russian demands before the formal negotiations have even begun. No return of all the Ukrainian territory acquired by force, no NATO membership for Ukraine, no American troops on Ukrainian soil. And Trump trashed Zelensky, calling him a dictator and saying he better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. It is no wonder that senior Russian officials like former President Dmitry Medvedev seem almost giddy with joy. What explains Trump's desire to sell out Ukraine and cozy up to Putin? There have been so many theories about Trump and Russia, but I think the real story here is about Trump and Zelensky. Donald Trump views almost everything from a personal lens, and his own relationship with Volodymyr Zelensky has been fraught for many years. In 2016, Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was exposed to have been on the payroll of Ukraine's former president, Viktor Yanukovych, a pro-Russian politician who fled to safety in Russia in 2014 after national protests against him. Then came the allegations that Russia had interfered in the 2016 elections on Trump's behalf. As a defense to those charges, some in Trump's orbit convinced him of a strange conspiracy theory that it was actually Ukrainians pretending to be Russians who were to blame. Trump seemed convinced by this explanation, in fact, so much so that in his infamous telephone call with President Zelensky in July 2019, he asked Zelensky for two favors. First, he wanted the server that would show these Ukrainian efforts to interfere in the US elections and frame it on the Russians. And second, he wanted Zelensky to launch an investigation into Joe Biden and his son. The key point here is that Zelensky did not give in to Trump's pressure, even though Trump was holding up military aid to Ukraine seemingly as leverage. Essentially, Zelensky called Trump's bluff. This must have left Trump outraged, a personal affront to a man with a healthy ego. Trump recently made another ask of Zelensky, a truly bizarre one even by Trump's standards. He demanded a 50% share of Ukraine's natural resources like oil, gas, minerals in return for American military aid. Zelensky rejected this neo-colonial demand, but said that some arrangement could be part of a discussion that included security guarantees for Ukraine. Still, it was a rejection of a Trump demand. Lev Parnas, the Ukrainian-American who worked with Rudolph Giuliani to pursue Trump's agenda in Ukraine, said to Politico, "Trump hates Zelensky with passion, and Zelensky knows it." I would guess that for Trump, Ukraine is a set of bad memories, and Zelensky is a foreign leader who has not gotten with the program. Constant flattery and submission to Trump's demands. The result, alas, goes well beyond the personal. It will result in a truly historic surrender of Western interests and values built over decades. The United States has long been at the forefront of efforts to make it illegitimate to acquire territory by force. After World War II, Washington urged that this idea be at the center of the United Nations Charter. At the Nuremberg trials, it required that military aggression be deemed a crime, and it actively supported this principle, sending troops to fight North Korean aggression in 1950 and Iraqi aggression in 1991. The results are noted in The Internationalists by Una Hathaway and Scott Shapiro. Between 1816 and 1945, there were more than 150 territorial conquests. Since 1945, with the international system of rules and norms the U.S. helped create, territorial conquests have almost completely disappeared, quote unquote. But thanks to Donald Trump's personal peak, this enduring American achievement is about to be lost. Go to cnn.com/Fareed for a link to my Washington Post column this week.